I felt this weight lift off of me because I didn't have to worry about any like expectations of society or anything like that. There's almost a high off of that, not having to care about anything. Hi, my name is Dylan. I'm 33 years old, and up until 2.5 years ago, I was homeless, hopeless, and addicted to heroin. Hi, my name is Dylan. I'm 33 years old, and up until 2.5 years ago, I was homeless, hopeless, and addicted to heroin. So around age about 23, I was like average college age kid, and I had a bad breakup, and right as I was starting Berkeley, I started using pills, and that pretty quickly transitioned into heroin, and my life just went completely downhill at that point. I pushed my family and friends away, and I was off running with this girl that I knew from high school, and we just kind of pulled our lives apart, and eventually I ended up on the street. I never imagined that I would be a heroin addict. I mean, I grew up in Orinda, and I just had this view of what a homeless person was, what a heroin addict was, and I couldn't have ever imagined that I would even come close to that. I drank alcohol, I smoked weed, but nothing ever like even crossed my mind close to this. But it's really amazing how quickly the transition happened. Once my life started going down that spiral, things just really fell apart, and all of a sudden I was using needles, I was homeless and on the street, and it's really kind of a whirlwind. I imagined that there was like these big walls that would stop me. Like when you get to the point of putting a needle in your arm, you expect that you're gonna have this like huge red alert come up, and it just doesn't happen that way. Typical day on the street, I would wake up around 10 a.m. I would probably be starting to feel sick at that point, going through a little bit of withdrawal. I would go over to Starbucks to go to the bathroom, get something to drink, and then I'd spend the rest of the day figuring out how I was going to make money so I could score. And that usually took me till about 5 or 6, and then I would wait for my dealer, which could take anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 or 4 hours, and then I would go back to my tent with my drugs and get high, and that was that. And then roll next day. Well, at first opiates treated my depression and my sort of emotional pain, but pretty quickly the consequences of them started outweighing what they were doing to help me, and yeah, that was really fast. I stopped going to my classes. I was not present for family or friends. Once I got to the point where I was physically dependent, where if I didn't use, I was sick, then everything was about, not just like my whole day and not all my time, but also friends and family. They started getting exploited. I was, doing whatever I could to get money to get high. So just was all consuming. And that only took, I would say, 6 months. That's something that people don't talk about a lot. Like there's sort of like, oh, drugs are bad and stuff, but nobody ever talks about the fact that heroin's fucking awesome. It feels amazing. It just also comes with these awful consequences that, either land you in the hospital, in jail, or dead. So, I don't know. But for the homelessness part, that was crazy for me. Like I said, I grew up in Orinda, like had a really good family, and homelessness just never seemed like something I would have to deal with. But when I first got on the street, I realized that I actually felt, a part of me was happy. I felt free, and I felt this weight lift off of me because I didn't have to worry about any like expectations of society or anything like that. And there's almost a high off of that, not having to care about anything. So I grew up in Orinda, spent most of my childhood in Orinda, and you know, it's a upper middle class, really, you know, everyone goes to college in Orinda, and it's a nice town. Most people don't imagine that their children will get hooked on heroin, let alone any drug. When my experience of being on the street is that there was help all over the place. There were churches, nonprofits, always sort of trying to do something, you know, bring food, offer assistance. And it was really about my level of readiness. Like, there was a lot of times where I would have these encounters with people like who were former addicts who kind of would like go out and proselytize, and you know, I would turn those people away because I wasn't interested in what they were offering. I wasn't ready to stop using. So yeah, there was tons of help. You know, what got me moving to a place where I was ready to be off the street, you know, there was a lot of people that I was close with that had sort of resigned themselves to that street life. And you know, in particular, I had a person that was really close to me, and he was about 5 years older than me, and I could tell that he had decided he was going to live on the street the rest of his life. And when I sort of imagined myself like that, it kind of horrified me. I couldn't imagine living the rest of my life like that. It scared me, and you know, it wasn't immediate, but that started moving me in a direction like, how can I change what I'm doing? Like, I do this same thing every day and nothing changes. So what am I gonna have to do to make a change? When I had my like last worst day ever, I had been living with a friend and we got into a huge fight. He kicked me out. I had been living with him. He kicked me out of his RV, and I fell asleep on the side of this building near where I was staying, and somebody snatched my backpack out of my hands. I like fell asleep against this wall like this with my backpack, and somebody snatched it out of my hands. It had all my stuff, all my drugs, everything. And I was like close to being ready to be done already, and that just like was that was the final straw. And at that point I called my parents, and I was lucky enough to have parents that were willing. They had cut me off, but when they could tell that I was ready to be done, they let me stay with them for a couple of days, and then I checked into inpatient rehab. I guess I should talk about that.
You should talk about that.
Okay. So yeah, I called my parents to go to rehab, and a couple days later I was feeling really sick, and I thought it was because I was coming down off of drugs, but I was taking a supplement called Suboxone that's supposed to help that, and it didn't seem to be helping. And then when I took my temperature, I had like 103 fever, and I was like, oh, it'll go away. And my mom's like, no, go to the fucking hospital.
It's okay.
My mom was like, no, you need to go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital. They did some scans, and it turns out that I had infection in my heart on my tricuspid heart valve. And you know, the doctors told me, they're like, if you had come in like a week or two later, you'd probably be dead. I had been like wheezing and having trouble breathing for the past couple months, and I just thought it was because I was smoking like a million cigarettes, but no, I had an infection in my heart and in my lungs. And so I was in the hospital for a month, hooked up to IV antibiotics, and luckily I was okay after that. It was really crazy how that all happened. Like, I feel like somehow, because I decided to kind of turn my life around, I was granted a reprieve from what could have been the end of my life. And yeah, so after that, I checked into inpatient rehab immediately after that, and I was pretty much determined to do whatever it took to change my life, and I did that. One of the big things that I did that I'd never done in the past, I had been to rehab several times, but I would always leave and kind of go back out onto the street. So I went to an SLE, a sober living environment, after rehab. And that's basically just a house where you live with other people who are trying to stay clean. There's regular drug tests. We have house meetings and stuff. And I got a grant from an organization called Support for Recovery. And basically, you know, for people that came out of a homeless shelter, they have no job, they have no money to pay for rent when they get out of treatment. So this organization gives people grants for 1 to 3 months just to pay their rent for those first couple months, get them back on their feet. And so I got a grant from them. They helped me out for the full 3 months, which like got me to a place where I was, you know, I had a job, a good job at that point, and I was back on my feet. And so when my partner and I started coming up with a nonprofit to help people in sober living environments, we had the idea of partnering with Support for Recovery, and they were on the total same page as us. They had been wanting to bring services into they had been wanting to bring services into sober living environments, and so yeah, they brought us on board and hired me full time. So it kind of came full circle. I was able to give back to this organization that helped save my life. For me, what made it addictive and alluring was that it numbed my feelings. You know, I kind of realized pretty quickly that it didn't just work on physical pain, which is what, you know, doctors use it for, but it also numbs emotional pain, and I didn't want to feel anything. And so for me, that was the most alluring aspect of it, is it just numbed me out completely. I couldn't feel anything. Okay, so when I see a homeless person on the street, it's funny, someone who was also previously on the street asked me this a couple weeks ago, and we had a really interesting conversation about it. It's not what you'd expect. So sometimes when I see someone who's like asking for money or on the street, I feel really bad for them. I know what they're going through. I have been there, and you know, I want to give them money. Other times I feel the exact opposite. I have no sympathy for them. I know exactly what's going to happen when I give them my money, because I have done that exact same thing. And so it's this weird dichotomy. Like sometimes I have more sympathy, sometimes I have less sympathy, which I don't know. I didn't expect that. I thought I would be more sympathetic, but it's not always the case.
I have a question for that. So, like,
Yeah.
if someone were to give you money, like, you were talking about, like, oh, I've been there, I've done that. So, what would you do with the money?
You know, when people gave me money, I used it to get drugs, almost always. Honestly, yeah, that's it. I wouldn't even buy food with it. I would just steal food or go to the food bank for food. So that's why I have that. Like I said, when I see people asking for money, I'm like, I know what you're gonna do with that. But that's my experience. So not everyone who's on the street asking for money is like me. Like they may not even use drugs. So I don't know, just wanted to throw that in there. If I saw another homeless addict on the street, I guess the first thing I would do is ask them what they want. Because if they want to change their life, then that's one thing. But if they don't, there's nothing I or anyone else can do to change that or help them or whatever. Now, if it was somebody that wanted to change their lives, I guess the biggest thing I would say is it seems terrifying to sort of change everything. What kept me from doing anything was that I was scared of changing and moving out of my comfort zone. But it's not that bad. In fact, it's kind of amazing when you let go of that fear. If I were to talk to my past self, I would say, I would tell him to forget about the fear of failure and to just go for your dreams. That's what, for me, changed my life more than anything. Like, I had to get away from drugs, absolutely, but it wasn't until I like found sort of a passion and something that filled up my soul that I really moved away from that old self. So, okay, my current passion is filmmaking, as well as sailing. That's kind of my hobby, but my current passion is filmmaking. I guess that's sort of the transient. It's sort of a passing passion, if you will. Like, um, my real passion is sort of focusing on stories like mine that don't get seen by people, and that's kind of why filmmaking seemed like the right way to go, because it's a way that I can tell those stories. Would I go back and sort of erase my really most of it was awful being on the street? Would I go back and take all that back? And I really wouldn't. Every moment I've lived up until now has made me who I am, and it made me a more compassionate person. It made me understand people's stories that I would have never before with my sort of limited existence up until then. And so yeah, I wouldn't take back any of my experience, horrible as some of it was. My film production company is called Shadow Power, and my partner and I went through like this whole process of figuring out what we wanted to call it. And I guess we called it that because I feel like these experiences, like from the darkness, have um, a lot of power and really wisdom that can help everyone. You know, I think a lot of people, not just addicts and alcoholics, kind of struggle and are searching for meaning and purpose. And what I learned in sort of a crash course was that you can't find it in material things. You can't find it in substances. You can't find it even in other people. Like, you have to find something that drives your soul from the inside. I guess that's what I would want to say. I don't want to say everybody, but certainly American culture, we are spiritually sick. And, whether shopping or gambling or sex, whatever, there's all sorts of addictions that people have to try to fill that spiritual hole. And, we have a culture that thinks that material items will fill that hole, and it just never will. Just never, ever, ever. As I said before, I grew up in a pretty typical upper middle class town, and I didn't have parents who beat me. My parents never even got divorced. I actually have perfectly lovely parents who were caring and compassionate people. And the image that I was shown about drug addicts is that they come from broken homes, they have horrible lives, and that's why they use drugs. And that just wasn't the experience for me. I had a pretty good life up until the time that I decided to start putting opiates in my body. And so I guess one of the lessons I learned is that there is no typical addict, and it could happen to anyone. I feel like everyone has some kind of a vice, whether it's alcohol, weed, gambling, sex, pick your poison, shopping. They all kind of relate to one another. It's this need to fill a spiritual vacuum that people feel. And I guess for me, what filled that was finding a passion and finding meaning and purpose in my life. And that has been the thing that changed my life and kind of got me to where I am today. I've been clean sober 2.5 years now. I manage the SLE I live in. I started a production company last year, and yeah, just bought a sailboat too, which is pretty cool. My name is Dylan, and that's my story. My name is Dylan, and that's my story.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Dylan. Shit. Hi, my name is Dylan. I'm 33 years old, and
It's okay, we can just wait. It's okay.
all right,
We're good.
this time, third time.